Welcome everyone. I wanted to do a video today on something that I feel is very, very important, not only for our own self-healing, but also as something that's very important to understand for our future generations. And this has to do with the complex psychological and emotional structures that get set up inside of our systems around self-image, which often result in very complex behavioral patterns like obsessive compulsive, over analyzing our own selves, self-judgment, self-sabotage, and constant diligent monitoring of ourselves in terms of what we look like, what we sound like, all of these things. It goes without saying that most people experience these patterns, behavioral patterns, tendencies, and have had to or are currently working very hard to overcome these kinds of things. This also brings up the issues around confidence and esteem and feelings around our felt sense of self-worth and these kinds of things. What I'm presenting here in this video today is the notion that all of these structures get set up beginning at our preconception stage. So it isn't as though we're born and then our life experiences just begin to teach us that we're inadequate, or somehow we have to be beautiful to get love, or we have to be tall in order to be beautiful, or we have to talk a certain way or be a certain way in order to deserve blah, blah, blah. In actuality, all of these things begin preconception. This begins with actually the energetics and the actual intention around why our parents are conceiving us in the first place. Perhaps mom has unresolved early childhood trauma that goes back to even her own conception or in utero experience, and she is actively still seeking her own felt sense of self-worth. Perhaps she's never felt self-love. And this actually happens to be a very common unconscious reason why people have children, is somehow when I have a child, then I'm going to feel love. And they're absolutely right. But to put the responsibility of your own feeling of whether or not you're loved onto your children is absolutely absurd. And not only that, is putting a massive weighted responsibility on that child. And I think that a lot of us adults can probably relate to what that burden feels like and how that shows up in our lives, of somehow feeling responsible to care for the needs of our parents. At the very onset of pregnancy, our mothers were poked, prodded, evaluated, analyzed, measured, and all of these things. And in conventional prenatal care, their prenatal visits were most likely with a male obstetrician and lasted maximum 15 minutes. And during that 15-minute window, mom is measured, weighed, her urine is analyzed, and then she's checked off and quickly sent out with the see you next month. Likewise, in the midwifery model of care, prenatals are specifically to measure for potential risks, to check to see, is mom or baby too big? Is mom or baby too small? Is mom eating enough? Is she eating too much? What's the weight? What are the measurements? And all of these things. My advice is that if you want to measure yourself, your beautiful, growing, evolving belly that's housing your baby, do it for the pure, utter curiosity and self-entertainment. Don't do it because it's granting you any kind of actual information about how far along you are in your pregnancy or anything like that. Obviously, you can go to be measured, you can measure yourself today, and if your baby's lying horizontally, the measurement's going to be very different than when you measure tomorrow and your baby is vertical. So this old school kind of method of measuring the abdomen down to the pubic bone to judge gestation age is just really impossible to be accurate. Women that I talk to leave prenatal sessions feeling, one, like they didn't have enough time and didn't even remember the questions that they thought of, that they wanted to ask or to address the concerns that they actually had. They leave feeling maybe some sort of false sense of relief that everything's okay. Or they leave with a new worry that they hadn't even thought about or considered before. And most always, women leave these sessions in some way experiencing a thought, an emotion, or a sensation that is trauma related. Whether that's her hyper vigilantly analyzing her diet and her food intake, whether that's something that was said about her weight or her size or her appearance that triggers a previous trauma that's been trailing through her family history for a long time. Perhaps she, like most women, experienced in her past an eating disorder, and all of the emotional energies that are underneath of that condition are coming up. And these things are coming up whether she's conscious to it or not. But these memories are somatic. They live in our soma, in our cells. And so whether or not she's conscious of it or not, because of course the underlying intention is good and is coming from a loving place, usually on behalf of midwives and birth attendants. But they're often not taking into consideration this woman's entire experience. Babies grow and develop, orient and organize themselves according to what they believe or they learn is going to make their mothers feel happy and or safe. Dr. Akira Kegawa, world-leading expert in prenatal memory, has done groundbreaking work to document how babies actually come into the world to make their mamas smile, to make their mamas happy. And so all of these conversations that are happening around mom about, is she too big, is she too small, is baby too big, is baby too small, if this doesn't happen by that time, then this is going to have to take place. And all of these conditions and all of these managing ways that we implement in modern prenatal care, in an industrial prenatal obstetrical birth, all of these things contribute to the way in which that prenate is organizing themselves and developing. So I'm just going to pause here because this is a lot of information and I want to make sure that I stay on track with where this video is going. Yeah, and it's a lot to take in because each and every one of us experienced these things. And I guide adults back to their own births and life in utero, conception, and even preconception experiences. All of our physical experiences from that moment that we entered form, all of our physical experiences, the memory of these things are contained in our physiology, in our soma, in our cellular archives. And so all of that memory is within our bodies. And all of the energy that surrounded us from the time of preconception directly informed the development of our immune system, of our endocrine system, and our nervous system, all of these things. And our development is absolutely dependent on whether mom is feeling safe or whether she's not feeling safe. Whether she's feeling loved and nurtured and taken care of, or she's not feeling loved and nurtured and taken care of. So what I want to bring in right now, just for our consideration, is what were we experiencing when we were in our mother's wombs? From my experience of guiding adults back to these early primal periods of development, we actually find in some cases that adults remember precisely the conversations that were had while they were living and growing inside their mother's wombs. Some adults retrieve actual word for word sentences or conversations that were had or things that were said to their mothers while they were in utero. And so what we find is that very common diseases and issues like mental, emotional issues, physical diseases, behavioral patterns, eating disorders are linked to this early preconception time. The other thing that I want to bring up in this video is ultrasounds. And I know that this is a very conflicting conversation. To me, it's very, very straightforward. The most advanced, accurate, precise technology that we have to gauge the well-being of our babies is our intuition. And the only way to keep birth safe is to harness the power of our intuition and to strengthen our intuition by not bringing in outside forces. This is a very deep, telepathic, innate, precise dialogue that's always never not happening between you and your body and you and your baby. And the moment that we bring in somebody outside of us or a technology outside of us to somehow grant us that sense of safety or knowing, or we deem that somebody outside of us somehow knows better than we do, we actually give away our power. And we give away a little bit of the strength and the psychic connection that we and only we have with our babies. There's lots of well-documented information on the risks and side effects of ultrasounds. Yolanda Norris Clark and Emily Saldea have incredible talks and information on their social media platforms and on the Free Birth Society website. I'm sure you'll find something on there that goes in depth talking about the real concerns around ultrasounds, and they are plenty. I want to just focus for the purpose of this talk on what I believe to be one of the most harmful effects of ultrasound, and that is the mere observation of the baby while they are growing in the private world that is their womb home. And you know, a lot of times you'll see pictures of babies growing in utero and they put their hand up. And this is very naively, interpreted as, oh, my baby's waving at me, when in actuality they're saying, go away, leave me alone. They're trying to protect themselves. Because this stage of primal development is not meant to be observed. It's not designed to be observed. Birth is only works when it's not observed. And so if we could actually drop into our bodies and really translate what are these babies saying, I think it would really shift the way we approach some of these things. Already from the time of in utero, we're being watched, we're being talked about in terms of our physical appearance, our gender, our behavior, our presumed attitude, and all of these things. We're being discussed whether we're going to look like this or look like that, or long or short or tall or wide, or look at their toes, look at their feet, oh, look at those long arms, all of these things. All of these conversations that are happening around us, we're taking in to our bodies. Whether you're a doctor or a midwife, a birth attendant, doula, or just a friend or a family member of a pregnant woman, please try to come back and remember that you're not only in the presence of a woman who's opening and stretching and becoming more and more porous to the energies around her each and every day, but you're also in the presence of a living conscious being who's not only taking in, but processing every single bit of what you say and organizing all the information and the energy that is present to them inside of their system. So often we make comments about women and their appearance and their size, and we make presumptions, even though they're well intended, they might be kind, they might be loving, about the presumed or predicted appearance of the baby. It's still projecting energy into their physical and astral field. And so bring this into consideration. And dear mamas, remember that you can communicate truthfully and transparently with your baby about what you're choosing. If you are choosing ultrasound, just be honest with yourself about why you're choosing this, and then truthfully communicate with your baby like the conscious, aware being that they are, the same way you would communicate to an adult. Because I will say, babies are way more conscious than we are. They totally understand. They totally get it. And maybe you remember a time when you were a child, I certainly do, where things were going on around me, and if someone had just taken the time to slow down, explain things to me, what's going on, I would have been like, oh, yeah, that totally makes sense. Okay, great. And move on with it. So please remember that you can communicate to your baby about what you're choosing and why you're choosing it. In the event of ultrasound, you can truthfully communicate to them, I am choosing to have an ultrasound because it's satisfying my need for this to feel more real. Believe me, to your baby, this feels very real. And the fact that our lives are so busy and stimulated, and there's so much distraction and there's so much going on, and all these things, that somehow this transformative experience doesn't feel real enough. This doesn't have anything to do with them. And I think we need to be really radically honest with ourselves about this stuff. And it's okay. It's okay. Just be truthful. It might be, I'm choosing to have this ultrasound because I need to feel a greater sense of safety about your growth and your development. It might be, I'm choosing to have this ultrasound because I need to stimulate some excitement around this pregnancy and this upcoming birth. But please communicate to them that even though you're choosing to do this to satisfy your desire or your need for this or that you know that they are growing perfectly, that you know that they know when and how to get born, and that they're the only ones that know when to initiate their time on planet Earth, and that they're the only ones that know how to get born in this lifetime. Let them know that you know this is a very real, felt experience for them where there's so much going on. You know that they're feeling way more than even you can understand. And so none of these decisions are because you in any way have any doubt around their process of growth and development and ultimately flourishing into who they came to be and are choosing to be. It's important that we reaffirm to our children that they are loved and welcome and accepted and respected for whoever and however they choose to be. I've definitely worked with a lot of adults whose present day insecurities, issues with confidence, low self-esteem, self-judgment, self-sabotage, compulsive self-correcting and perfectionism, and all of these things go back to their in utero experiences. And oftentimes these are things, as we know, that have been trailing through for generations and generations. It's absolutely critical that we finally, once and for all, wake up to just realize that all of this stuff does not belong to the future generations. And the souls that are coming to Earth now are not coming to do the same kind of emotional work, karmic clearing. They're not coming to do the same kind of ancestral healing that we're doing. They're coming to teach, to lead, to heal. And so the more we can do to keep their consciousness intact so that they just are born knowing, never questioning whether or not they deserve love, never questioning whether whether or not they should hesitate or any of these things, whether or not they're supported, whether or not they're believed in, but rather just born knowing that they are love, born with a very strong esteem, as highly esteemed, confident beings, as grow to be very good communicators. Why? Because their parents were communicating to them, and they can clearly differentiate between what's theirs and what's not theirs. And in this way, we create coherent, well self-resourced and self-regulated human beings. Babies learn to communicate and humans learn to communicate when they have good examples of communication, when they are communicated to as the living, conscious, aware beings that they are. And if for those of you who are watching, if you are anything like me, I have had to work very, very hard and continue to work very, very hard to refine my communication skills in my relationships, and most importantly, to my own self. The way of communicating with ourselves is strongly informed by the way our parents communicated to us, which of course was a reflection of the way that they were learned to communicate with themselves. This stuff has nothing to do with being a perfect parent, whatever that even means. It doesn't exist. It's just about being coherent with your own experience and communicating clearly, transparently, and truthfully so that they can be born as